Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Humpty Project. I'm joined by Martha Treder. She actually joined me a couple weeks ago, but I never published the episode. Part of it is my perfectionism, where I always strive for everything to be excellent. And we were all maybe a little nervous first time we had met. Carolyn Wonders had joined us too on that one. Today, Martha and I are setting out to just be real. And the topic is something that's very personal to her. And it's going to allow me to explore some of the things that I've been wrestling with for the last 10 years. And I've been wanting to take more of a stand and have a better understanding of issues around gender, uh, transgender, and all of that, if you will. And this for me started in 2016. I remember being agitated when during the election. It was the election year. It was somewhere around the summer when Department of Justice under then President Obama brought a case against, I think, North Carolina, the famous bathroom bill about transgender bathrooms. And I thought, why are you poking the bear? There's so few transgender people in the world. Why are you poking the bear? Why are you bringing this up? Because the opposition is going to use this as a culture war. Um, I thought, from a political point of view, it's 1% of the population, something very small. I don't want to harm them, but at the same time, I thought politically this was dumb. I've later come around. I've forced myself to unlearn a lot of things, and I've really started to force myself to take a stand. And you'll see I say he, him here because I wanted people that don't identify as the gender at birth or have changed gender. I want them to feel that I'm a safe space. So I've come around pretty far on this one. And I realized that it was far more than safety in bathrooms that the Republicans were going after, or far more than women, women's sports. And now the dialogue, the laws that are being passed, literally put people's lives, excuse me, literally put people's lives in jeopardy, all because they identify differently than I do. So I think it's really important to bring this up. Martha, you have a lot of special thoughts on this. You've maybe wrestled with some of the same issues. I don't know, but Carolyn gave me a little hint. So I'd love you to tell people more about it. And like I said, let's just try to talk like we usually do.
Yeah, the generation that I grew up in, it was two genders, male and female. And I have actually two trans children. One who is transitioned from female to male, and another who is non-binary. And what I've learned through my journey with them is that gender is on a spectrum. It's not one or the other. We've had to have labels, and there's a lot that goes into deciding, what gender is, and gender is, and I've learned is personal as opposed to, being out there. I mean, we're all assigned a gender, and which is a misnomer because it's actually, it's a sex marker when we're
Right.
born, based on our biology,
A biological sex, right?
our biological sex. So we're deciding, the doctor looks at, oh, okay, boy, girl, based on that. But there's so much more that goes into, defining who we are
Right.
as a person, as um, as a as a person.
What was
And
it like when your first child came out to you?
um I was scared, and I was,
Because you said learned a lot. I heard you say I've learned.
um again, because it's, we were also taught to kind of sweep all of this under the rug, and
Right.
why is this a thing?
Right.
And um and I'd known about transgender, people, but not kind of in my backyard, so to speak.
Right.
Um, I also had a certain amount of grief. There was grief and there was fear because I knew that that they were targeted.
Right.
That in America we've politicized gender. We've decided that somebody decided that it's male, female, or nothing.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, maybe sickening too, uh, that in certain cases there's people looking at other people worried and wondering what they have in their pants. It's like,
Right.
why is this an issue? Why does this affect you? Um, but
Yeah, and it's a social, and what I learned was my child was my child,
right,
you know, despite the label and he didn't change his personality. He didn't change who he was, you know, overall, and yes, he did change himself,
right.
from, you know, but the same qualities that made me love him were still there, and it's and working on my expectations. You have a child, you go the route,
Right.
the whole heteronormative route, whatever, they're going to, grow up, go to school, do their thing, and all's going to be peachy, and that narrative wasn't my narrative, or my child's narrative.
When did all of this begin then? When did your son just start describing these feelings and a desire to be recognized differently?
It was probably in eighth grade,
Eighth grade?
yeah. But he didn't fully transition, and of course, middle school, eighth grade, they're exploring, and it's like, am I this? Am I that? And so there was kind of some questioning on whether or not this was the route that he wanted to go. And it wasn't until he got into college, end of high school, college, that he's like, yeah, and I feel really good, about myself. And the happy, and I never seen him happier. Um, how do I say this? He was really happy when he finally admitted and acknowledged, this is who I am, and took the steps to align himself, dressing differently, and doing hormone replacement therapy, and and I knew it was the right decision because he hadn't been happier. He was happy, but and he's happier now, living a life aligned with who he believes he is.
Right.
Um, and so that's because I also as a parent go, is this a phase?
That's what I
So
wanted to ask. Is this a phase? Is this something he felt peer pressure? Because there's those who'll say, "Oh, it's just trendy now. It's the cool thing for kids to do is to explore multiple sexualities or gender, etc."
no, and for him it wasn't a phase. My younger one, who's non-binary, had also felt like he was, actually my youngest used they them pronouns.
Right.
So they actually thought that they were wanted to transition to another gender. And as it turned out, that wasn't the case for them. Was they realized that they were more on a spectrum, and it's like sometimes he feels more feminine, sometimes they feel more masculine, and then they, and so having those two experiences going, my oldest who really did know, it's like I'm not in the body that I need to be in. I
Right.
don't know that this body is mine. And my youngest going, you know, saying this body is not mine. And then realizing that that wasn't really what that was about. That it was more like, um, and I don't feel male. I don't feel female. I don't, and so who am I? So I must
Right.
be, and um, so kind of, and
So
it's all
he felt forced to pick one, but never felt comfortable that either really
correct.
well described how he felt, right?
Right, right, right. So, and I'm thankful that there are therapists out in where I am, where, we could talk about it and kind of hone in on, what is actually going on,
Right.
and took the care and time, no judgments whatsoever. And, and because the therapist for my youngest was like, well, if you want to transition, I need to feel comfortable that this is what you want. And that's, and that's not what I'm hearing.
Right.
And through his, my youngest work with the therapist, it's like, oh, okay, you know, I can be trans, but I don't have to like, be one or the other, so to
So
speak.
yeah, so it's not I guess there's one thing rattling around in my mind, and it's always seemed to me whether that is somebody who's gay or somebody who's transitioned and is transgender,
Yeah.
the abuse they know they're going to face. It seems to me it'd be pretty rare that somebody would just do this because it's a fad and a cool thing to do. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying that I'm certainly saying that that abuse shouldn't be there, but
Right.
it does seem like you're you're younger. They were probably feeling some conflict in I have to pick.
Yes.
And I often wonder the second thing that rattles around my mind, and sometimes I ask people this when we get into this as a debate, is when they decided they weren't gay. I'll ask a man that starts taking a very hard position, and they usually get pretty mad at me. It's like I always knew I was hetero. Well, so did I. I mean, I knew I was heterosexual my whole life. I never had any feelings towards being homosexual or gay. And when I ask that question, I think it's pretty revealing because people will usually say, well, I always knew. But then they'll tell me, well, these kids are too young to know. They don't know. They're still not forming. It's like, well, then are you telling me that you're still struggling or you were struggling through your teenage years? And they'd say, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So I think we generally all know, and we've learned that it's not just the parts you have at birth or XX and XY chromosome. I've researched, I'm not an expert, but I've researched, I know there's a whole bunch of different chromosomal combinations that exist. And then there's all kinds of, I guess, hormonal and genetic markers too that affect all this. And like any society that's learning, we're learning more about this. I mean, we didn't know 400 years ago. I'm going to say 400, maybe 500 years ago. We didn't know what electricity even was, but it was there. Ben
Yeah.
Franklin and the kite, right? I mean, it was there. So we didn't know it existed. We didn't know X-rays could be used. We had no idea about wireless communications, infrared, ultraviolet. All of these things have been there. And we've discovered them because we've had the science to discover them. I mean, our eyes can see what we see and we can hear what we hear, but if we have scientifically developed instruments that can see other wavelengths, hear other things. And I don't
Oh,
see why we can't accept that it's any different in the spectrum of gender.
right. Well, and transgender people have existed, as long as people have existed.
Right.
This isn't new. And so we're looking at this through a heteronormative lens. And I also want to say that I'm not an expert on this either, and it's
Right.
just personal experience and doing my own research and on that, and the other thing, that you struck up for me was gender, your gender and your sexuality are different. So you parse those out. So you've got men, so
Men who are sexually attracted to men.
like like terms like cisgender, it
Right.
refers to a person who aligns, like I'm female, I align with my
Same.
body.
I
you know,
I
so
I
um,
align with the gender I was assigned at birth.
so cisgender, and then, so take me for example, I could be attracted to another female, I could be attracted to to a male, and that's different from my sexuality. Who I'm attracted to is different, and they've got all, then you've got I would be heterosexual or homosexual, or and then, or there's asexual and pansexual, and there's all these terms
Right.
that and my kids are trying to explain it to me, and I'm just like, my head is swimming because
Yeah.
it's like all of these lab I hate using the word labels,
Yeah.
but we have to have them, so that we have some idea of what we're trying to describe,
Well,
or
we all like to label things so that we can sometimes better understand them.
right,
And sometimes those labels can bring great harm to the people that are being
right,
labeled. But sometimes
right,
I've learned in as being a parent, I've tried to understand psychological labels and behavioral patterns and so forth. Not necessarily to label anybody in my family, but to be able to understand then how to deal with somebody who's got maybe narcissistic tendencies or other manic tendencies. Those labels help me say, okay, now how do I, as somebody with maybe compulsive tendencies, how do I trigger that person? How does that person trigger me? How can I treat and react and respond to them differently? I go in better prepared. But for whatever reason, this topic of transgender has really been a flashpoint for a lot of people. I I never really would say I hated, but I didn't understand it and thought it was just kind of weird, or you're a bit of a freak, but so be it. Do your own, do you live your own life. And it took me some time to get to know. I think one of the first people was a next door neighbor in a previous community where we lived, whose daughter has transitioned or is transitioning to a male, and the parents are super supportive. But the abuse that he's gone through, and is now has a birth certificate aligning to his identified gender now. But the abuse that he's gone through, people aren't just going to do this uh, voluntarily. And I go back to personal history. I don't share this often, but I was molested twice by gay men, or at least by predators who were, uh, they would both, I think, be gay men, but they're closet gays. And I would think as I got older, maybe if they could have been out of the closet in the 60s and the 70s, maybe they wouldn't have had these, maybe they're just predators. But maybe, just maybe, if they were able to live their life as they wanted, they wouldn't have had to repress some of these thoughts that manifested as taking advantage of a younger, smaller person. So it took me a long time to come around on that one, Martha, because I was pretty much kill all the gays, but because
yeah,
of what I went through. Um, and so trans was just kind of, I think, just an extension of that. Okay, I've got the gay thing a little understood, but what's this trans thing, and what's a cisgender, and
right.
and what's pansexual and asexual, and then all these others. But I started, like I said, I started to look at it like my eyes are scientific instruments and they can see, all of us can see certain wavelengths and we can hear certain wavelengths, but there's so much more out there.
Right.
And we just have to be aware of that. And the reason I wanted to talk to you is first because Caroline volunteered you. Um, but but obviously you have, deep personal connection to all this. But I want people who do follow me and do listen to start to understand and normalize that transgender people exist and they have the right to exist and they have the right to be treated fairly and not be worried about being assaulted or killed. And you see it happen all the time. Unfortunately, there's too much violence, and the only way we can stop some of the things that are the worst reflections of humanity in our country, I think, is to bring it into a more normal. Yeah, I think almost anybody who's met a friend or a family member, some will disown their kids. I've read that too, but I think that's your first chance to say, okay, this isn't as unusual as I thought. Where I lived in Pennsylvania, the people from Penargil, I lived in this town, Easton, 26,000 people, but we had a circle, roundabout, some would say. The people from Penargil, 20 miles away, were scared to death to go to the circle because you had to drive around the circle. I mean,
Right.
it's not a great example, but people don't like to do what they're not familiar with. And when they hear about these people, they're just freaks that they can't understand. And I don't know why they all jump on the hate bandwagon, but I want to help try to eliminate that.
Because they don't understand it's they don't understand it, in the in and so it's like if they don't understand it, then they can hate it. The other thing is they dehumanize trans people.
Right.
They identify them as their disease or their predilection or whatever they want to call it, and not see them as human.
I
And it was eye-opening for me,
Yeah, I
it's
know that.
in the sense that it's like if you know somebody who's trans, and I had the blessing of the before and after. So I obviously, it's like, here's my child. And, so then my child went from female to male, so my daughter to my son. But that's all that changed.
Right.
That is the only thing about
Right.
my
You said
child.
that your son's personality was always basically the same, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and that didn't change. Interest didn't change. You're still doing the same thing,
Right.
playing games or whatever it is, going to school and doing all of that. So the person didn't change.
Right.
The label changed.
Right.
So that's why I have such a hard time with labels, because it's just like, we get so bogged down with the label that we're not seeing
The
people,
human.
the human behind that label.
It's interesting because what you said, I didn't remember this, but a couple months ago, a person that I don't really, I'm not connected to on Facebook, but some friends are. And I don't like this gentleman's ways because he's very pontificating and, he's one of these, I don't know what you call it, but it's a way of kind of gaslighting with highfalutin, haughty kind of language where he sounds so intelligent and polite. And he wouldn't address somebody by their name. He addressed a woman by, well, dead named, I guess you call it. So
Right.
addressed the woman by her previous masculine name, and his last name is Becker. So I kept calling him Pecker, and he said, "I've never been anything but respectful to you." I said, "Well, I never said you did, but you're Pecker to me." Yep. And he said, "Well, I was being disrespectful." And I said, "Why is that? You've been asked to refer to this person by a different name, and you won't.
Yeah.
So why should I, when I see you as a pecker, refer to you anything other than a pecker?" And he
Right.
said, "Well, because I'm not going to facilitate their mental health
Yeah.
issues. I'm enabling their mental health." And that's where I guess you've lived that. That's where I was like, this is just transphobic. And of course,
Yeah,
this person
yeah,
wouldn't admit to that, but and it's in the ADA or the AMA or whatever the
right.
list of
Yeah,
psychiatric disorders. I think from my research, it's there to so people can treat, so doctors are able to provide hormonal assistance and transition therapy. It's not like they're taking 12-year-old kids and like adding body parts or removing body parts, but they are helping them cope with some of these things that, frankly, a lot of them, from what I understand, are really depressed and, suicidal until they start treatments.
yeah. Being transgender is not a mental health issue, and it creates it creates depression, it creates mental health issues because of how they're treated.
Right.
And it's not like, it's not like when, Donald Trump says that, your kid goes to school one day and then comes back the next as a different
Yeah.
gender. It's like,
Yeah.
no. This is it's a long process. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's a process. And this, oh, years, it's a years long process, and there's a lot of safeguards um, to protect trans people, or, trans youth, anyone. It's not like willing, you wake up one day, it's like, okay, I want to be a different gender.
Right.
It's you do go, and you have counseling, you go through counseling, and you go through, and you work through this, and it was years before, my daughter became a son,
Right.
um so, and getting to hormone therapy and
Right.
all of that. So
Right.
there's a lot of safeguards in place, which some are good, some are not. It's, is finding good, the good safeguards, and not having people tell you, you're just depressed, or
Right.
this is just a phase, or this is, whatever it is, but actually listening to, to that person.
Right.
All of us know ourselves much better than anyone else outside of us can.
And then I would hope our doctors, our psychiatric professionals know far more than any politician ever would. And there's a great Jon Stewart clip. Uh, Probably it's a longer interview, but there's a great clip of about 3 or 4 minutes where he's talking to a woman who's from Arkansas, public official. And
Mhm.
kudos to her for hanging in because she was just falling on the sword as John was eviscerating her about these topics,
Yeah.
and that one was one that really compelled me to start to think differently. And again, that's Jon Stewart. I'm no Jon Stewart, but that's just another voice that a light bulb went off in my head. The one I think there's some legitimate discussion around, and some people are like, the second you even bring it up, you are automatically transphobic. So there can be very extremes on either side, but that is, when you see a person that's been a boy, physically been a boy for 16, 17, 18 years, and then they start transitioning to being a female, and they want to play in female sports. And the big one was from the University of Penn, Leah. Um,
Yes, yes, I
uh,
remember that.
yeah, and there's been a couple. There's been some cross country runners that have all of a sudden, as a boy, they were mid packers, and now they've transitioned, and now they're running against the women. And Title IX has brought women's sports pretty far here
Mhm.
in the country. Women have some equal opportunity. I mean, they're still well underpaid compared to the men, even though I think some people are watching. Is it Caitlin Thomas, the basketball player? I think is her name.
Yeah, Clark, Caitlin
Caitlin
Clark.
Clark. Yeah, I don't follow sports the way I used to, and my memory's gotten
And the
terrible.
only reason I know that is because she's gotten a lot of flack, and
Yeah, but
and
people are going to see her, and but nonetheless, a little bit of a diversion there. The thing for me is when I think it was Leah Thomas. Then it was the name. I'm confusing the two. I think Leah Thomas is the name of the swimmer at Penn. If somebody's built, you know, has gone through puberty and built a masculine physic, masculine muscles and bones and the skeletal structure. It does seem to me that there's a legitimate discussion around, hey, even though you're taking hormones and you're reducing your testosterone, you have physically built some sort of an advantage. There were the boxers in the Olympics, which the Russians were the ones to throw them out of competition, but Imran from Iraq or Iran or wherever, that a lot of people were really worked up over. And I didn't follow it that closely, so I don't have a lot of opinion. But I know that I think it's Leah Thomas seemed to be seemed to be um, uh, you know had gone through puberty and was a male for many years of her life, and then started swimming and all of a sudden was dominating some competitions. And I think there could be legitimate discussion around that. I don't know what the answers are, but it also, the people that hang on transgender hate will also pick up those three or four little isolated situations as if that's the norm.
So
So I wonder what your thoughts are.
what I like to bring up when people bring up, transgender athletes, I like to bring up Michael Phelps.
Yeah.
Michael Phelps's wingspan is 7 feet.
Yeah. I think
And
he's got maybe web toes.
right, yeah, yeah, who knows? But
Yeah.
but in quite significantly larger arm span
Right.
than any of his competitors. And how many, and he's got over, I don't know how many gold medals he has.
Lots. Yeah.
You know,
Eight in one Olympics alone. Yeah.
right, right. So do we, what do we say? And his wingspan gives him unfair
Right.
advantage. He was blessed.
Right.
And everyone's like, "Oh, Michael Phelps, you're great. You're the greatest swimmer ever." And yes, he is. But then how do we say, okay, your wings, everyone else's wingspans is 6 feet
Right.
versus 7 feet. You've got a full foot advantage. So therefore you can't compete.
Yeah. I think that I've heard those arguments. I think that that won't resonate with a whole bunch of people,
No,
unfortunately,
I know.
because it's like he didn't add. People would say, "Well, he didn't add another foot to his wingspan in his 18th year of life or anything."
No, no,
There's some runners that are actually maybe even it becomes the grayer area that I think you're trying to describe, and one of them, the most prominent, I follow running quite a bit, Caster Semenya, South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, but I think South Africa. She was setting world best times and closing in on the world record in the 800 meters. Born at birth, a woman with a uterus, but has internal testes. So, there goes your whole XYXX thing.
right.
Um, the amount of abuse she's faced, she was forced onto testosterone reducing um, uh, drugs, and her times dropped by 2, 3, 4%, which is enough to take you out of the podium in the Olympics and world championships, and then reinstated again and started to run well again, and now I think it's banned again. But there's an example of somebody. If you want to just stick to the born signed at birth, there's a woman. She has a vagina.
Yeah.
That's a woman. You don't, and now people are complaining, well, she has internal testes. Hang on. You just said it's gender at birth. So I do think there could be a legitimate discussion around those very exceptional cases where somebody transitions as a man toward a woman later in life and their skeletal structure is big and bulky like a man.
True.
But
And then but aren't we selling women short, girl, whatever, in oh, girls can't compete with men.
right,
So you've got that narrative going on. And so if a man transitions to a woman and they're say running,
right.
competing and running against one another. So, do we go, poor women because they just are not as good as men? You
Yeah,
know,
I hear you. I mean, I haven't come around on this one yet on these very exceptional
right.
ones, but what I'm not going to do is harbor hatred and acrimony and advocate for um, violence against people because of this, or I'm not going to rail on people. I've had people criticize me just because I have he, him. Get rid of
Yeah.
the pronouns. I've had people tell me they'll message me on LinkedIn, get rid of the pronouns. It's like, no, I'm not getting rid of the pronouns. I do
No, I
that
like,
for a reason. I want gender
yeah,
fluid. Other people don't identify as I do as a cisgender to be able to say, hey, he at least is safe. I think our time is going to be
yeah.
topping out in three
Sounds
minutes.
like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, but
But
yeah, I knew that that point could be a
yeah,
flashpoint for you, the athletics point. But
and and again, this is only from my own, that's my own opinion.
yeah,
And I just think that, and I do understand that I mean, built, men are built bigger, whatever, and that there are some physical things that a man
right,
can do better than a woman. But they also, don't know enough also about HRT, and we don't know, so um,
right.
um, and so I'm kind of stumbling in the sense of, so they're on HRT and they're becoming a woman, their testosterone levels are going down.
Right.
So, and I don't have an answer to that. And I think that every person deserves to be who they want to be and who they feel most comfortable being. And we should not be politicizing it. We should not be,
Yeah.
judging it. We should not be, we need to, like you said, look, widen the lens,
Right.
widen the perspective.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and exposing, yourself and being vulnerable on some of these points and being open, and allowing me to express myself where I still have some conflict, because I think we see in this country, we're so polarized that there are like purity tests. So on the left, there's purity tests. If I raise the issue that maybe there are some exceptions where a person transitioning shouldn't participate in women's sports, it's automatically you fail the purity test.
Yeah,
And
no,
on the right, I don't know if there's a purity test, but pretty much it's just if you're nice to anybody that's transgender, then you failed it. But we are on a Zoom session because of technical issues, so this is going to time out. I think we were pretty relaxed, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope everybody that tunes in enjoyed it, and I promise to get this one edited and up there soon.
I would love to talk more about this because
Okay,
it really is a lot of to, more than, we just kind of scratched the surface.
no doubt.
And so, and I'd love to do it again.
Okay. Zoom's going to sign us out, and it's very mean about it. It'll just say bye.
Boom.
Okay. Take care, Martha. I'll be in touch really soon.
Thank you.